Hello, my name is Diane, and today I'm going to talk about all of the series I read from this year that I'm not going to finish. All of these have at least one sequel out already, and for the most part, I just didn't really enjoy them that much. I don't think they're necessarily bad, but they were very much not for me. So, getting right into it, I have Wayfarers by Becky Chambers. For this, I read The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet, and while this seems to be a beloved series in the cozy sci-fi realm, this just did nothing for me. It felt very much like a lot of stories that I've already experienced before. It reminded me too closely of too many things I've already seen in stories, in sci-fi stories. And it really just felt like fan fiction to me because it reminded me so much of so many other things, of so many specific other things. I know that the second book has a shift in who it follows and how the story plays out, but the first book just really turned me off from even giving the second book a chance. I just don't want to get into more of just reading characters that I feel like I already knew in situations that I feel like I've already seen. So while this works very well for a lot of people, it did not work at all for me. And that is why I'm not gonna finish reading it. Wayward Children by Seanan McGuire. This is another one that I feel like a lot of people really love this series, and I read 7 books. I tried so hard to get into the series, and I don't care. I read the first 7 books. The first book is Every Heart a Doorway. I'm not going to name all of the books after that I read, but I read the first 7. They were fine. I love the concept of this world. The first book really wasn't what I expected, and then the books following that were a little bit more what I anticipated the series to be. They do all relate to one another in some way, but they are fairly isolated stories. And it follows characters who have gone through to a portal fantasy world. They've gone and lived in this world for however long and then come back to the real world, and they are not adjusting well. This particular group of characters, some characters come back and they can't wait to forget the fantasy world that they went to. This cast of characters are the ones that just want to get back there. They just want to go there and live there permanently. We kind of get to know them and explore why they're so eager to escape the real world. Some of them we see more of what their experiences in that fantasy world were than others as we go kind of back and forth between the current real world and when they were in that fantasy world. I really like the idea of it. I just didn't like the way it was executed for me. I didn't connect with the characters. I thought some of their situations were kind of weird and glossed over, and I wish we had delved a little deeper into them because they all seem like they have some pretty specific reason why they're so eager to get out of their real life situation or their situation before they went to the fantasy world. Now they're all living in this home together. So I think it's safe to say after 7 books in a series, if I wasn't loving it, I'm never going to. Earthsinger Chronicles by Elle Penelope. I read Song of Blood and Stone. This book is kind of weird because there are multiple versions of it that exist. You can access all of them depending what copy you happen to get, and they're all very different in length. One of them has 2 extra main characters and a whole other storyline going on, and then I think one of them is just a shorter version of the other one. So that's very confusing. If you want to talk about this book with someone else, you need to figure out if you actually read the same book. And this I didn't like, kind of for similar reasons to why I didn't like Wayward Children. There was just a lot of things going on in the world and with the character that I wish we had gotten to flesh out and spend more time with. There's hardly any world building done in this, where you get some idea of the world, but then things were happening, elements were coming up as the story went along, and I was like, what? Wait, where are we? Like, what time period is this even set on? What kind of technology do they have? It was always surprising when someone just pulled technology out. There were like vehicles, and it felt very out of place because I had no real concept of what the world was. The main character's a farmer. I didn't really care about the main character. I didn't like the romance. It focuses very heavily on romance. And it felt upfront when the two characters meet like it was going to be an insta love story. And then we just kind of backtracked, and then they barely knew each other and were just getting to know each other, but they weren't communicating at all, and that was causing all of their problems. And I find that so frustrating when the main problem in a relationship is that they won't just talk to each other. Just have a quick conversation and then the problem's resolved. And I just can't wrap my head around. I know that would relieve all of the tension and kind of diminish that if that's what the romance is based on. But I just don't like that style of romance. Unless there's a valid reason for them to actually not like each other. If it's just one of them won't say, hey, I heard this, is it true? And that would end all of their problems. It just feels so silly, and we spend so much time on the tension between them. And I really wish we had just gotten over that and focused on the world and the plot that's going on in the world, because there's so much else going on in the story, and we just spent so little time on it. So all the things I didn't care about, we spent a lot of time on. All the things I cared about, we barely talked about. So I'm not going to continue with this series because it's just not for me. I'm not the audience for this, clearly. Then I have Tales of Thamore by M.J. Kuhn, the first book being Among Thieves. The second book, I think, is called Thick as Thieves. That came out this year. I enjoyed this. It's a high-style fantasy. I liked the characters. I liked the plot. I don't really have any problems with this. There's nothing negative keeping me from continuing with this series. It's just since I finished this book and had a little time away from it, I don't really think about it ever. So since it didn't stick with me, I don't really want to devote time to continuing this series when I could be reading other things that I am really excited about. I just wasn't left with any anticipation to carry on with this world and these characters, even though I liked them. It was a good time while I read it, but I wasn't eager to jump back into it, and I don't really think about it. And the last series is Sister of the Salt by Erin A. Craig, the first book being House of Salt and Sorrows. This is a fantasy romance. It's based on a fairy tale, but it follows this girl, and she's one of 12 daughters, and at the start of the story, her mother has passed away, and I think 3 or 4 of the sisters have also passed away in different circumstances, and it's believed that this family is cursed and eventually all of the daughters are going to die in some mysterious circumstance, and this daughter is determined to figure out what's actually causing it. She doesn't believe it's a curse. She believes there's someone behind it, and she wants to figure it out before she loses any more sisters. It's a romance, so obviously she has a love interest, and it kind of flowed between being a fantasy romance and being a dark fantasy. There's a lot of dark, creepy things that happen in the story, and I thought those were really interesting. But once we got about halfway into the story, it kind of lost me. There were too many fantastical elements put in that felt like they were just a little out of place or a little too much for me personally. The romance was fine. I thought it was very obvious. I also thought it was pretty obvious what the conclusion was going to be, who the villain of the story was going to turn out to be, and I think that was kind of disappointing that I thought it was so easy to guess, even though there's a lot of attempts to distract you from who the obvious choice was. I don't feel like it led up to the big reveal in a way that for me was satisfying. Just wasn't for me. There were a lot of things that just didn't really jive with me. And that's okay, but I'm not going to read the sequel to this. And that is it. Luckily, most of the series I read this year I really enjoyed and either finished or wanted to finish. Plan to continue when the next sequel comes out. These are just all of the ones that I don't think I'm ever going to read the sequel. I don't see myself ever getting enough interest in any of these in the future to pick up those sequels. Let me know if you read any of these and loved them, or if there's a series that you read that you don't want to finish at all because it just didn't work for you for whatever reason. I'd love to hear about it. That's all for me today. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time. Bye.